Thank you guys so much. Would you guys thank the Awesome. So, Sodom and Gomorrah is where we are today, and we've kind of been traveling all over the ancient Near East, and so in just a second, all of our standard media volunteers are on, and I had this precious gift. Somebody saw me clicking away, and they said, "Would you mind if I help?" And so that's great. So Landon is about to go and get it swapped over to my keynote because that's kind of a hard thing to do. But in the meantime, I want to tell you, it's a kind of interesting thing. Our service is because we are talking about all these different issues. There's several people that don't live in Mobile, but are kind of part of our community. And whenever we have communion, I always think about them. People that attend our service online, because this is the one thing that they can't get, and I've communicated with a lot of them, and so some of them will randomly be in our service, and when they can get down this way, but there's all kinds of really weird ideas I've had of how do we get communion to the people who can't make it here, who live in somewhere, I don't know, like Pensacola or somewhere. I'm still thinking on that. One day we'll figure that out. Like communion via mail, maybe that's sacrilegious, I'm not really sure. It's not, I'm a preacher, I get to make that determination, right? So here we are, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So if you remember the story, it's important for us to kind of set the stage, right? So you remember in the Bible, Abraham has this a nephew named Lot, and when God calls Abraham to go, he calls him to go by himself, but he doesn't go by himself. He takes Lot with him. And they travel around, and then there's this point at which, in Genesis 13, that Abraham and Lot part ways. And when they do, Lot settles in the Jordan Valley. And when he settles in the Jordan River Valley, Abraham then goes to the other area that, it's funny because Abraham gives him first choice, and it gives us an insight into Lot's character. When he looks out over all of the places that he could go, Lot chooses the best place, right, the most fertile place, and gives Abraham the leftovers. So he goes to the most fertile place. He ends up actually settling in Sodom, and so while he's there, two angels appear to Abraham, and it's kind of weird. Maybe it's God too, but it's kind of unclear. And they say, we're going to destroy Sodom. Abraham knows, of course, that his nephew, Lot, lives in Sodom, and he doesn't want his Sodom to be destroyed, although he does understand it is a wicked city. And so he barters. He bargains back and forth with these angels and with God, saying, okay, what if you only found 50 people? Okay, we won't destroy 50 people. And then they go back and forth, like 50 to 40 to 30 to 20 to 10, and then that's it. It kind of cuts off at 10. If we can find 10 people. And so then they go to Sodom, and it doesn't turn out that way. There aren't 10 people. There's actually just Lot. And we find out that it's not even Lot's daughters, but Lot's daughters get saved because of Lot, okay? And so the angels come, they stay with Lot. It's a horrible scene. And then they leave. The angels, the next day, it's time for all hell to break loose on the city, and he says, okay, so you guys go, and you go off to the mountains, and Lot says, we're not really mountain people, we're kind of more city people, which is hilarious to me. Like, these two angels are saying, we're going to destroy the city, and you're going to say, I'm sorry, I'm not really kind of camping, I don't like to rough it, right? But they do, and so they say, okay, just go. Like, seriously, leave. And so they go to a city that's name literally means small. And that's where they end up. But they say, the angels say, of course, don't look back, right? Don't look back. So they run away, and Lot, so Sodom and Gomorrah are burning, and Lot's wife looks back, and she's turned into a pillar of salt. It's interesting. There's in Jewish writings about the story that are not in the Bible. There's another story about Lot's wife that when he asks her to prepare bread or prepare meal for them, they don't have enough salt, and she says, "We don't have enough salt," and so she goes around to all the neighbors to get salt, but also to tell them that there's these two visitors in her house, and that's actually how the mob forms. It's always an interesting question of how does the mob form, and that's because of her. And then later we get the very literal sense that her heart is in Sodom, right? That's her. And so when she turns back, that's what happened. So Sodom burns and Lot's wife turns to salt. Okay, those are two things that you can find in the dirt, right? We talked about, if you remember, on our very first week, we talked about how the civilizations, there's these big hills, and they call them tells, and each one of these tells, underneath it was an ancient civilization. And as you excavate as an archaeologist, you find layers. And what happens is, as one city is destroyed or whatever, it's toppled over, and then the next city is built on top of it. And so there's these layers. And so you can tell when one city was destroyed in a fire, because that layer is destroyed, there's a destruction layer, and it's all burnt, right? And so that's something that you can find, and salt is also something that you could find, right? So the archaeology is really fascinating. There is a pillar of salt called Lot's wife, and that's what it looks like. It's near, it's near / part of a mountain called Mount Sodom, and so what's interesting about this is that it's a pillar of salt. The salt in these mountains has a peculiar quality. In that at the top of these mountains, it's stone, and the salt is in the soil underneath them. And there's something called salt tectonics, that salt will come together and rise up. So actually, all of these things are rising up out of the ground, a fraction of an inch a year. Now this one, and so what makes that great is, when it rains, if there's salt, there's a big rock salt, and it rains enough, that salt will dissolve and wash away. You would never see that salt. But because of the way this is created, because there's this capstone, the salt is protected by the stone on the top. And so what will happen, okay, so let me just go through. So this pillar of salt has a right date, and you can date it because you can look at this capstone and they can date radiocarbon date that, and it's about 2000 BCE, which is about the time that we're looking for Sodom and Gomorrah to happen. Now, I should say also, this is really big. That's not like human size. They say it looks like a human. In all the archaeology stuff you read, it's like this. How do they say it? It's like really amazingly human-like pillar. And I look at it and I'm like, I don't see it. But I don't know. I'm not an archaeologist, so maybe it is human-like. But it's huge, right? It's several hundred feet tall. So anyway, this is about 2000 BCE that this happens. But here's the way this mountain range works with the capstone and the salt. The salt, like I said, will wash away in water. So when the water falls and when it drains into the mountain and around the mountain, it washes away the salt that's underneath the stone. And so this is some of the most dangerous part of Israel to work in as an archaeologist, because there's caves and caverns underneath. So what will happen is the salt will start washing away a cave underneath that you don't even know is there. And then eventually you'll have this cave with this piece of stone on top, and something happens, an earthquake happens, and that top will collapse down into the inside. And that's what's happened here. As a matter of fact, I don't have another view of it, but you can actually see where this pillar is. The salt, you can see the stone that had collapsed in between the two, right? Because there's stone on top. So this is how this was formed. There was a cave that happened and through the rain, and then some sort of earthquake, and the top would collapse in. So what that means is that, so it's moving upwards. So that's what it would look like right before it came. So it's an unroofed cave. Like it starts to cave in, and then all of a sudden it's totally separate. Now, what you think about when you think about this stone, it's moving upwards at that fraction of an inch a year, and what that means is that we can reverse engineer that, right? If we know how fast it's moving up, we kind of go down and down and down, and then we'll know about how tall it was. And so it was about 100 feet tall back in the day of Sodom and Gomorrah, and at the time when it collapsed. And so what you can imagine is when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed in this kind of cataclysmic event, there's an earthquake about that time, in that same time frame, that could have collapsed that, and so the story of Lot's wife kind of appearing there would develop around that column, which is kind of cool. Now, the traditional place, for a long time, the archaeologists said where Sodom is the city that's really close to this place called Mount Sodom. And that city is called Bab-edh-Drah. And Bab-edh-Drah, that's it right there. It's about 12 acres. You're looking at about 12 acres right there. Though it looks like a sand castle on the beach, it's not. That's about 12 acres. And Bab-edh-Drah is close by this Mount Sodom. And because of the tradition of this mountain being called Mount Sodom, because of the tradition of that being called the Lot's wife, they said so the city has to be close by this mountain. So they excavated, and it sure does have a destruction layer. There's a place where it was destroyed, and so you can see that. And but there are a lot of problems with this site, and for a long time, Christians who were looking at archaeology, this was one of those challenging finds. The problems was at first, when you look at that destruction layer in this city, it's at the wrong date, like really the wrong date. Like almost 1,000 years off. Okay, so the destruction layer in Bab-edh-Drah is not at the right date at all. Second is, when you hear the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and when we hear about them in history, these aren't tiny cities. 12 acres is not a big city. Okay, this is not that impressive. When you're looking at cities in that time frame. And so it doesn't seem like a large enough city to match what we've heard about. And then the most important piece, the thing that's most frustrating to biblical archaeologists, is that it doesn't match the Bible's location of where it is. So the real odd thing is that this Mount Sodom and Lot's wife, that pillar that we just saw, is not where it should be when you follow the narrative. And so that's what we're going to do first. We're going to try to locate via the text. All right, so let's see, can we read this? Okay, so this down here, the bottom blue is the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is a big salt lake. And so you see where we are: Jerusalem, Jericho, Bethel, and Ai. Bethel and Ai, Bethel and Ai. Those are, again, I'm about to read those out of the Bible so that you know where to look. All right? So here's how we go. In Genesis chapter 13, starting in verse 3, it says, from the Negev, which is the desert region, it's not good, but from the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There, Abram called on the name of the Lord. So Abram and Lot are together at this point, and they go and they settle in the place where they've settled before for a little while, right here in between Bethel and Ai. All right? And then, later on in that chapter, starting in verse 11, it says, so Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and set out towards the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot among the cities of the plain, and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, and were sinning greatly against the Lord. So here's what happens. Right here, they have the breaking point in their relationship, and it says that Lot travels east, okay? Lot travels east. Now, the place that we have that pillar in the city of Babed-Dra is actually way down here on the south side of the Dead Sea, all right? So the south side of the Dead Sea. And then this right here is the Jordan River, right? And so Lot goes east and settles in this plains region, and there's a plains region right here. There's a big circle, and it's incredibly fertile. The Jordan River would overrun its banks each year and deposit all the wonderful silt and moist soil, and then they would plant. It was incredibly fertile. There are tons of cities in this area during this period in time. And so Lot goes and he settles right there. That's what the Bible says. And so if we're trying to look for a place in the Bible that matches this story, whether or not it's traditionally called Sodom by the people now, we need to be looking in this area. And so there's a group of archaeologists who have been doing just that. And there's several sites that have been excavated in this area. And there's a guy named Dr. Stephen Collins. He's a very well-known archaeologist, incredibly well-respected. And Dr. Collins has been excavating a site called Tel El Hammam, or in the Arabic it's Tal El Hammam. So Tel El Hammam is the site that he proposes is Sodom, and we're going to get to that right now. So that's what it looks like. Tel El Hammam. Now, first thing is, it is far larger, way, way larger. Whereas Babed-Dra is 12 acres, this is 100 acres. This is a very, very significant city. It's 100 acres. And at this time, the Middle Bronze Era, when we're expecting to see this Sodom of the Bible, it is just incredible city. So they dig around in the dirt, and you get pictures like that one of Babed-Dra, where it kind of looks like a sandcastle if you don't know what you're looking at, right? So what the archaeologists do is they'll take the drawings, and then they'll make scale drawings of what it looked like before it was destroyed, right? Because they could tell by the amount of debris and by the landscape and the footprint and all that kind of stuff. So they did that. There's a massive, massive gate to the city of Sodom, which is a sign of prosperity and power in the ancient world. And this is what that gate looked like. That is the gate to Tel El Hammam, or what I believe and what this archaeologists believe, a lot of archaeologists believe, is Sodom. Now, just to get you the idea, they've got a man that's drawing the scale right there. Okay? So this is huge, absolutely giant. And what happens is, from there, so the city, there's that, and then right in front of that, there is a temple. I'm sorry, let me make sure I get this right. Yes, so there's a, oh yes, so right in front of it is a temple, a massive, massive temple to pagan gods, and the temple is so big that its wall is 10 feet thick, right? A 10-foot thick wall. Incredibly huge temple right out the front door, and then you can continue dead on. If you go from the door to the door of the temple and straight out, there's an area of sacred stones, like Stonehenge, right? So an area of sacred stones a little further southeast of there, straight out of the temple. And this is like incredibly precise, and just incredible. It says to you, these people are serious about the worship of these pagan gods, right? And so the idea of the wickedness and all of that, it kind of furthers the importance of that. Right? It furthers the kind of credibility of this being Sodom with this massive temple complex, and all in line with these really, really, really ancient sacred stones. Stones that would have been ancient to the people who were living there at that time. All right? So that is what we see here at Sodom. And then, just at the right time, it is destroyed by a large fire. And it's vacant. The city is vacant from 1540 BCE to 1000 BCE. 540 years, it's empty, right? Almost 5.5 centuries, nobody lives there. Now, if you can imagine a city being destroyed by fire, right? There's a lot of ash that would accumulate there. Now, there's 540 years for rain and water to wash away ash before the next city is built on top of that. Okay? 540 years for rain and water to wash away the ash. And still, after 540 years of erosion, the ash layer that's drawn there with that red line, the ash layer is 3 feet thick. 3 feet thick after 540 years of water erosion. This means this wasn't a small fire, right? This wasn't a tiny destruction. This was an epic destruction. And then, on top of that, the fire was incredibly hot. This is a picture of a pottery that was heated over 2,000 degrees and turned into glass. So they have evidence of not just a massive destruction at an incredibly high heat, like way hotter than anyone in that time could kind of artificially produce. So you have a cataclysmic event that happens in this city. But my question was about the salt, right? It's still in the back of my mind. It's like, well, where's the pillar of salt? That would be just like the perfect little extra piece, right? And so, like, I went on and on, like, going through all these different research tools that I have to search journal articles about salt and blah, blah, blah. And I found some guy, and he wrote like 40 pages on, like, the soil composition in Israel, but I can never find anything about salt here. So, anyway, I said, you know what I'll do? I'll just email the archaeologist. Like, he probably won't email me back, but, you know, whatever, I'll try it. So I emailed him, that guy, Dr. Stephen Collins, the lead archaeologist at Tel El Hammam. There's other archaeologists there, but he's the big dog. So I emailed him, and I was like, hey, I'm about to preach this sermon, and I've been trying to find about salt. And I read the other article in this same journal where your thing was published about the way the salt works in the mountains and the cave and it falls and all that kind of stuff. Like, is there salt like that around Tel El Hammam? And